Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh.
Okay, so we're going to the next chapter. We got to put on Facebook. Okay. So it says here in the tour, Osin matzah misorat nekiya v'afilu hi yafa. So what does that mean? That you're allowed to make matzot from like very finely sifted flour, right? Which is like very white. Uh, Even if it's very good stuff. So why would you think that you can't do it with fine flour, right? With the white flour? Like what's the novel idea here? So probably the reason why he's saying this is because matzah is called lechem oni, right? Which is like bread of poverty, whatever, affliction, whatever they want to call it, right? So you may think, right, that you shouldn't use bread which is flour which is very fine, very white. You might think that you shouldn't do that because you should use not just regular bread, like not something really good, nothing high quality, right? So comes to tell you that you can use that, right? Even though it's called the bread of right, poverty, whatever you want to call it, right? Rechem oni. Okay, so that's the thing, because poor people don't eat fine flour, right? They eat the dirty stuff. Okay, so right, that's the idea. So let me just see the Bet Yosef if how he addresses this, right? So he says he brings a source for this, which is Perek Kol HaSha'ah, right over there in the Gemara, Lamed Vav Amud Bet. לא יכול לא יצא ידי מדי חובתו אלא בפת הדרעה. תלמוד אמר מצוות מצות ריבה ואפילו כמצתו של שלמה. Right, so again, right, so it brings the Talmud here, which says, right, you may think you can only use like not the good stuff, right? Not the white flour. So comes and tells you, no, you can use the white flour, right? Really fine flour, like King Solomon, right? Used to have on his table, the good stuff. Right, so nowadays, by the way, just the opposite, right? That people think that the whole wheat is the best, But things have changed a little bit regarding that, because in the old days, the white flour was considered to be the good stuff, the one which is sifted out and the bran is removed and all that stuff, right? That's the good stuff, Okay, whatever, right? So there's all kinds of issues. I'm not going to get into the health issues now about this, right? But at least we know one thing, that you can use white flour, right? By the way, in Israel, they don't sift out the flour there. They grow wheat there, for the sake of Passover. And the wheat over there, by the way, is a different taste altogether. It's not like American wheat. It's like sweeter, whatever. But anyway, right, the point is that they don't sift it out. So, it's just like, it's whole wheat. So when you buy matzot, shmura matzah, what I'm talking about, right? Handmade, the handmade stuff. When you buy that in Israel, you're getting always whole wheat, no matter what, right? There's nothing else. But here in America, they do have white flour, that they make the shmura matzah, so you can get the white stuff if you really like it. But I personally like the white stuff. What can I tell you? But If you're buying an Israeli product, you're not going to get it, right? I'm not talking about, by the way, the machine matzahs. That's something else, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about the shmura matzah. That's going to be always whole wheat if it comes from Israel. So yeah, that's the story. So it goes on to say here, Vitanya tu hatam yotzin bepat nekiyahu v'hadra'ah v'resh Rashi. So Rashi explains, right, regarding this hadra'ah. What is the bread which is called hadra'ah? Shenital kol hadarah v'ainu pat kibar. So it says, right, that's the pumpernickel, right, the black bread, which is all the grain, all the I'm sorry, the right, all the dirty stuff is there, right? All the chaff and all that stuff is there, So it's not the good stuff, Pumpernickel, right? Whatever, right? So yeah, so that's called hadra. The Rif Katav Gamken. So the Rif says, he says, Perush pat hadra pat subin, right? So he says, right, it's bread. The Rif says also, like similar, it's bread which is made out of bran, They're using the bran, the dirty stuff, right? The dark stuff. Right? And so it is what it is, right? You like it or you don't like it. It's up to you. I don't know, whatever. I'm not gonna tell you, right, what to use. Katav Aran, so says the Ran, Alav and Alav, he says the Ran regarding this. But Nikret Pat Hadarash and Nitra Kol Hadarato Lo Nehera. So he says, doesn't seem right, he says, this explanation. So he says, because you can only fulfill your obligation with the bread which is obligated in challah. Right? So what does that mean? He's trying to tell you, right, that since this kind of bread, right, bran bread, right, pumpernickel, whatever you want to call it, I don't know. It's not really right, it's all bran, so basically it's not obligated for challah. So he says, therefore, you can't really fulfill your obligation when it comes to Passover matzot as well. Okay, interesting. The Arosh Katav, so the Rosh brings the Rambam. Katav Perk that he wrote there in the Perk Vav. En yotzin lo bepat subin velo bepat mursan. Right. So the Rambam says, right, like the Ran apparently, that you can't fulfill your obligation with the bread which is bran from bran, right, or things like this, right, the pumpernickel black bread. But the Rambam says, right, that even though you can't use bread which is like totally bran, but he says you can just mix it together, the whole thing. In other words, whole wheat, right, the whole thing, from A to Z, right, it's all there. So that you can use, that's not a problem, right? Whole wheat is not a problem, right? But just to use pumpernickel, something like that, right? We don't want that. That's not kosher for the mitzvah. So he also brought, right, the opinion of the Rif that he says, right, it's bran bread. That means that he didn't remove the bran, right? It's still there. In other words, it's not all bran, but he didn't remove the bran. So he says, but if you're using, bread, which is like totally bran, so he says, guess what? It's not even called bread, right? It's not called bread. It's all waste products there, So that you can't use. Right, so what we see, right, from this these authorities is that you can use whole wheat, right, but don't remove the white stuff and just leave the bran. This is not bread, right? This is just junk, right? Whatever, I don't know what you want to call it, right? Whatever it is. So yeah, that's the story. So he says, therefore, since it's not called bread, it's absolved from challah. There's no obligation in challah either. Right? So he says that's the way the Ra explains. The words of the Rif. The Aran Katav שהרמב"ן מפרש שההדראה מלשון הכנה והדירה שבתבואה שאמרו במסכת פרה. So the Ran says, right, that the Ramban, he explains that, when we're talking about the bread, which is called hadra'ah, והיא התולעת הנעשית בתבואה, והתבואה נאכלת ממנה נקראת דרעה. So, according to this, interesting, right, so it's interesting. He says, right, that this is the worm that is made that is in the grains. And so he says, right, that when you're using grains like that, if you eat that stuff, right, it's called dera'ah. Okay, I don't know, whatever. This is very, very unusual, right? Thing, whatever, but that's the way he explains it. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So says Shulchan Aruch, En yotzin lo bepat subin velo bepat musan, right? We can't fulfill the obligation with bran bread, right, or something like that, right? More sun, right, which is like all that chaff, right? The chaff and the bran and all that stuff, which is in the wheat. We don't want that stuff, right? That's not called bread. So if you just have that, and there's no white stuff in there, right? There's no the actual wheat itself, right? The body of the wheat. That's not called bread. So therefore, you can't fulfill your obligation like that. But he says what you can do is, right, just do whole wheat, right, which is the whole thing, right, from A to Z, right, everything is there, the wheat, the chaff, right, the husks, right, everything is there, the whole thing from A to Z, right. That's okay, that you can do. Okay, so and so also you can, and if you want to, right, also you can use, as we said, right, the very white fine flour, right, which people say today they say it's not healthy, right, to eat that stuff, but in the old days it was considered to be the good stuff. But things have changed, right, right, and we don't say, right, that this is not called the bread of poverty, oh, this is not poverty. What kind of poverty is that, right? This is for rich people, the white stuff, right? Oh, so, you may think, right, that it's not proper to use that. So comes and tells you it is. So in other words, right, basically what we're saying is like this, right? Bottom line, you can use whole wheat if you want. You can use white flour, very fine, right, sifted. If that's what you like, you can use that, right? So those things are kosher, no problem. So says the Rama. So what you can't use, as we said, right, is just like totally, just bran, and right, husks, and right, chaff and stuff like that, right? That you can't use. That's not bread. So says the Rama, וטוב לכתחילה שלא לעשות המצה רחבה יותר מדי. So right, says the Rama, תהווה כעשישה. So he says, you know what, לכתחילה, he says, don't make the matzot too wide, he says. Right? Lechatchila, In other words, bediavad, if you did that, you're okay, but lechatchila, you shouldn't make them too wide. Interesting, right? So the question is why? Why does the Ramah say not to use that stuff, right? So let's look at the Mishnah Berurah. Maybe he explains this, right? Let's see what he says. So says the Mishnah Berurah. Okay. So he explains that, right? The Mishnah Berurah. Something interesting he says, which is that it brings a Talmud. In the Talmud, it says that, right, lechem oni, right? It's called lechem oni. What does that mean? The bread of poverty, right? The bad translation, by the way, is the bread of affliction, which is not exactly the proper thing. It's really the bread of poverty. That's the proper translation. But anyway, right, the thing is that when you make it very large, right? So, right, here's the thing, right? It's not anymore so poverty, right? Poverty stricken, this bread. Why is that? Because large loaves, right? Big challah, right? Whatever, right? That's not poverty, right? That's wealth. So this is the reason why the Rama says you shouldn't use lechatchila, right? You shouldn't make it too big, right? The matzot. And the truth is, that nowadays there's pretty much like a standard size, that they make them. I'm talking about the handmade ones, right? Because the box ones, the ones in the box are very small. But the handmade ones, pretty much a standard size, so that's the custom, to make it like that big, pretty much like, I guess you could say, right? It's about 12 inches, right? Those shmura matzahs, right? About 12 inches. That's the size they make them. So it seems like 12 inches is okay, right? But I guess we shouldn't make it too big, right? Not 24 inches, right? Not 2 feet. Okay, whatever. You get the idea. So that's Aleph, right? In the Shulchan Aruch. Very good. Let's go on. Let's go to bed. So so interesting, right? Yeah, we should look at the tour first. Let's look at the tour. So it says the tour, Isak Klavim, right? Bizman Shorim Ochlim Hemenu Yotze Ba Yedei Chova. So this is very interesting, right? This is something which, historically speaking, it was relevant. And to maybe today, maybe not so much. But in the old days, right? Today they feed dogs, right? Other things, but in those days, what they would do is they would feed the dogs a certain type of bread, like a low grade bread, like probably made out of barley or something. So he says, right, that if you're using like this kind of a dough, right, which is made for dogs, I guess you call it the doggy dough, right? Whatever. I don't know. So he says, right, Bisman she'aro'im ochlim memena, right? He says if the shepherds also eat it, right? The shepherds also eat that stuff, right? Sometimes, they eat together with their right with their doggies, whatever, right? Yotzim ba, it's just then you fulfill your obligation. Veim lav en yotzim ba. If they don't eat it though, right? The shepherds, then you don't fulfill your obligation. So I guess you can see the point, right? What's the point over here? The point is that if only dogs eat it, right, then it's not really, fit for human consumption, right? So I guess that's the idea, right? Let's see the Bet Yosef. He probably explains it. It's a low grade bread, low quality stuff, right? Whatever, they make it like a certain way, like barley and stuff, whatever it is. So says the Bet Yosef regarding this. Where is the source for this? Mishnah beperek Kama the Chala, right? It's in the first perek of Chala. The Mishnah there. Mishnah Chet. Be'uva beperek bet de Yom Tov, right? It's also brought down in Yom Tov, right, which is the Masachet Betzah. Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Piresh Rambam. So Rambam explains Isata Klavim, right? So what is this, right? The doggy dough, right? What's going on with that? הוא שלשון אותה במורסנה, שלשון אותה במורסנה, ודומה לו, הוא מתכוון לאכילה לכלבים. So he says, right? Why is it called doggy dough, right? What's the reason why? So he says because it's made from chaff, right? The good, the bad stuff, right? So therefore they give it to the doggies, right? That's what they do. Oh, zulatam mimine achayot, right? Or all kinds of other animals, right? Whatever, right? They give it to, right? Interesting, by the way. I've noticed, by the way, like I've seen some, dogs, like, the behavior of some dogs. And I noticed that when you put bread in front of them, they don't eat it. They never eat bread. I don't know why that is, so I don't know how they got their dogs to eat bread, our dogs won't eat that stuff. So I don't know. Not exactly sure how that works, right? Maybe they eat it because it's made out of the husk, right? The whatever, right? And that's the bran, whatever, right? Maybe that's the reason why they eat it, because it's not real bread. Go figure. I don't know. And so anyway, right? ושלא יאכל ממנה שום אדם, right? So in other words, it's not meant for human consumption. That's the bottom line, right? It's too inferior for humans, so it's not real bread, in the real sense of the word. So therefore, you can't fulfill your obligation with that stuff, right? That's what we're saying. Okay, good. So let's go on. So he says, "Ina chayvet bechala." Also, it's not obligated in chala, right? Because as we said, it's not bread. So therefore, there's no chala either. We already mentioned that before, right? The Ma'amar Hashem Yitbarach be'acholchem milechem haaretz, right? Okay. ואין אדם יוצא בה ידי חובתו בפסח. You can't fulfill your obligation בפסח. לפי שאין אדם יוצא ידי חובתו אלא בדבר שחייב בחלה. So he says the reason why you can't fulfill your obligation with this is because you can only fulfill your obligation with something which is obligated in chala. And this stuff is not obligated in chala, as we already mentioned, right? That's the thing. כמו שביארנו במה שקדם, right? Like we explained already, in the halacha, what was before this. Ad kan that's the end of it. So it seems from the words he says, so he says, what's interesting here is that, it is fitting for human consumption, he says, right? Human can eat it. In other words, he won't die, right? Whatever, he can eat that stuff, but, it's just not bread, though. That's the thing, right? But he says, when you're not intending it for, human consumption, it's not called bread. Oh, right. So if your intention is to give it to the dogs, right, that already precludes it from being called bread. But he says, right, Rabbeinu Shimshon katav isad klavim, right? He said that's right. He writes that. What does it mean, right? When this doggy dough, right? Whatever mefaresh b'Yerushalmi. So brings the Yerushalmi, right? Kol she'irev ba musan ufamim shemit'arev kol kach telo chazia le'eroim. So he says, right, that they mix in there, the bran, and sometimes he says they put so much bran in there that even the shepherds can't eat it, right? So therefore, it's only a doggy thing, right? Okay, that's the thing. That's how he explains it. Very similar to what we just said, except that here, right, he seems to be saying that it's not only bran, right? It's there's also bread there, but there's so much bran in there, right, that it's not fit for consumption for humans. It's not a human thing, right? In other words, they could eat it, they're not going to die from it, right? But it's just not something that humans like to eat. You know what I mean? It's too dark, right? Whatever, it's too black. Right? It's too junky, right? Whatever. So it says, so the chazia lechem karinan bein, right? That if it's, as we said, right, if it's obligated in challah, then we call it bread. Rabbeinu katab betur yordea siman shin namen. So it says right the two rights over there in this chapter. Isat kalavim bezman she'aroim ochlim mimena. That if it's a doggy dough, right, and if the shepherds eat from it, chayevet, then you're gonna be right. 1 second, I'm sorry. Yeah, chayevet bechala. It's gonna be obligated with chala if the shepherds eat it. Techi chazia lechem kinan be, right? Because we call that bread. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't read it right. I'm going to read it one more time. I skipped something over here. So it says right like this. Isata klavim, right? The doggy dough, right? Bisman she'aroim ochli mimena. If the shepherds eat it, chayevet, then it's obligated in chala. Ve'im la petura. And if they don't eat it, it's absolved from chala. Lichora mashma. So it says it implies from there. Im rawiyah leroim. If it's fitting for the shepherds, ve'im lav she'ena rawiyah lachila. So that means that it's not edible, right? It's not edible for humans. Ve'Ramban piresh al pi al Yerushalmi. So Ramban explains according to Yerushalmi, shafilu im haya solet nekiya. even if it was like clean white, right, white flour bread, right, baguette. It was a baguette, right? But he says if he made it for the doggies, it's still absolved, right, from chala. Right. So there you see, right, that it depends on your intention. It's not only what's in there, but it depends on what you made it for. What was the purpose for that? Okay, good. Yeah. So it has to be recognizable that it's for dogs. So he says, you know what? How do you see, right, that it's not made for that it's made for dogs? Because it's not like, right, shaped nicely, like a nice dough, like a nice loaf. Doesn't have that nice shape, right? So meaning what? When you're making it for dogs, dogs don't care about the shape of the bread. You know what I mean? They don't care if the loaf looks nice or not. Whatever. It's a perfect rectangle or or whatever it is, right? Or a octagon, whatever it is, right? Who cares about that? The dogs don't care. All they want to do is eat, right? They're not into aesthetics. You know what I mean? So therefore, right? Says the Ramban that it has to be like that, right? That it has to be made in a way which is recognizable that it's not for people. Okay. But if it's not like that, he says it's obligated. So what is the Ramban saying? The Ramban is saying like this, right? That, you know, if you make the bread, right, like really white, good quality stuff. So if that's the case, he says, um, right, but if you made it for dogs, though, it's still absolved from challah. But he says that only applies when it doesn't look like a nice piece of bread, right? Like a nice loaf, right? They didn't bother to shape it nicely or whatever. So then it looks like a big blob, like nothing, right? Nothing significant. Okay, that's what the Ramban says. Interesting. Okay, so we'll see the Shulchan Aruch here. The Shulchan Aruch, Isat Klavim, right? If you have doggy, right? The doggy bread, right? Whatever. Bizman she'aroim ochlim mimena yotzim ba. So it all depends on this, right? Do the shepherds eat it or not? That's how we paskin, right? Not like the Ramban, because the Ramban said something else there. But right, if the shepherds eat it too, right, then you can fulfill your obligation with that, for the matzah. Can you imagine? A doggy bread, right? You can use for doggy bread for matzah. Okay. Ve'im lav. If not, right, if the shepherds don't eat it, and yotzim ba'yishen zo meshumeret l'shem matzah. So he says you can't fulfill your obligation in that case. Why is that? Because it's not made for that purpose, right? It's for dogs. It's not for matzah. Interesting. So says the Ramah regarding that. We don't, today this is not. It doesn't exist such a thing like that. I don't think anybody's giving right bread to dogs these days, as far as I know. Okay, they're giving them other stuff, right? It's like like whale meat, right, and horse meat and stuff like this, right? All kinds of stuff, or all kinds of fish, right? All kinds of things like this. Okay, so right, Kachem Divrei Ramban. So it says this is from the Rambam, this whole thing, right? But some say it's because it's not called bread, right? If the shepherds don't eat it. So he says that seems to be the more proper opinion, he says, the Rama. So what is the Rama arguing with here, right, regarding this whole issue? So according to the Shulchan Aruch, the reason it's all the reason here, right? The reasoning. If the shepherds don't eat it, because it's not made, right? It's not guarded from matzah. This is the reason why Shulchan Aruch says, right, that you can't use it. So it comes Raman and says this is according to Rambam, but he says there are others, like the Rash, as we said, right? The Bet Yosef, that they say it's a different reason. It's because it's not called bread. If the shepherds don't eat it, right? So the question is, right? What's the practical difference between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah here, right? It seems to be just a reasoning. So the difference is that sometimes, one reason can apply and the other reason cannot apply, right? You know what I mean? So if one reason applies and the other doesn't, so then there would be a difference of opinion between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. Right? So yeah, but right, as we said, right, this is not very practical nowadays. So we don't really have to get into it too much. Not really so practical. Okay, let's go on. So now it seems like we're getting into something a little bit more practical. Okay, interesting, right? So it says the tour like this. Itza shebelilata raka, right? If you have a dough and it's very it absorbs a lot of water. So meaning what? It's very soft. The chaluta, and then what they do is they boil it right in water. Like those what do they call that stuff, right? Those bialys, right? They boil them in water like that. Berotchin, lo mikre lechem, so levarech hamotzi. So it says this is not called bread. So therefore, the blessing is not hamotzi on these things. But look what he says, right? Ve'ei afia batarachi batanur mikre lechem לעניין המוציא וחלה ויוצאים בד ידי מצה. So he says, right, but it depends. If you first, right, boiled it in water, right, and then you baked it also in the oven afterwards, so then it is called bread, right? But if you just boiled it and you didn't bake it, it's not called bread. So what is that called? It's like a donut, like whatever. It's just boiled, right? I think they call bialys today, whatever. All kinds of names. I don't know, God knows. So now, which one is the one today, right? Which is boiled and then baked? The bagels are, right? The real bagels, not the phony bagels that they sell in the Midwest, right? Or whatever, somewhere. All right. I'm talking about the real New York bagels, right? The real New York bagels, the way they make them, right? They have a special taste. Why? They have a very good taste. They're different than all the other bagels in the world because they first, right? This technique that they use is they first boil it in water, right? In a cauldron, and then they remove it from the cauldron and they put it in the oven, right? And that's why it has that special taste, the New York bagels, which are famous for their, special taste, right? So those are hamotzi, right? And they're obligated in challah. And you can also use them for Passover, to fulfill your obligation. This kind of a situation. But right, if you're talking about the stuff which is only boiled, right, in the cauldron, like those bialys, I think, whatever they call them, right? Those you can't fulfill your obligation. That's not called bread. So then what would it be? It's mezonot, right? You would make mezonot on it. It's not hamotzi. Right? The blessing will not be hamotzi. It will be mezonot. And so it's like a donut, basically, the same thing as a donut. So yeah, that's what we're talking about here. Yeah. So you can't fulfill your obligation with that stuff either, right? For Passover, if it's not put in the oven. By the way, the same thing also applies, to like things which are made in the pan, right? Like pancakes and stuff like this. You can't fulfill your obligation with that because that's not called bread. Because right, even if you use like very white flour with no sugar, right, nothing, it's still not called bread because it's not made in the oven. There is a machloket about this, by the way. There is a dispute, but that's how we paskin, right? That pancakes are never going to be hamotzi, right? Even if you eat a lot of them, right? Let's say if you ate like 4 pancakes, right? So that's already a lot of dough there. More, like 300 grams of dough, but still, right? Because it's right, it's fried and not baked in the oven. It's not called bread, right? So it's never going to be Hamotzi and Birkat Hamazon, right? And it's never, there's not going to be any challah involved. All these kinds of things, right? Okay, that's pretty much what we're saying. Okay. So regarding right these bagels, right, the things that which are boiled and then baked. So here the Tur brings a machloket, right, dispute whether you can use them for Passover. What does that mean to fulfill your obligation, right? Some say you can't use it, right? The first opinion says you can't use it, and according to Rav Hai, right, one of the Geonim, he says you can use it for Passover. The whole zeh ladin a Gemara. It says that's according to the Gemara. He says, right. אבל הגאונים אסרו כל חליטה. But here's the problem, right? Came the Geonim after the Talmud and forbade this stuff, for Passover. All this stuff. Why is that? Because you boiled it in water, right? So that could, that's already a red line, right? Could become chametz. So therefore, nowadays we don't make anything like this for Passover, right? We don't boil dough, right, in water for Passover. We don't do that. The question is, right, why did they do it in the Talmud, times of the Talmud, and now we don't do it? What happened, right? Right? What happened? What changed? So the answer is that we don't know how to do it. We don't have the proper technique, right, to do it. They knew how to do it in a way, right, that it wouldn't become chametz. Nowadays, we don't have this technique. We don't know exactly how to do it. It's a matter of timing and, technique there. So since we don't know how to do it, we just leave it alone, because it could become chametz. You boiled it in water after all. No good, right? So, okay, so we'll do the Shulchan Aruch and we'll stop there. I guess we'll see.
Kavod harav, the water and the heat, correct?
I'm sorry?
It makes it the water and the heat, correct?
When it comes to water, you don't need heat anymore.
No, but
even without heat, it already does the job.
Okay, thank you.
You know what I mean? And the heat makes it even worse.
Yes, I think we spoke about this yesterday.
Yeah, the heat makes it even worse. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, God bless. So, right, but even if like rainwater falls on wheat, right, let's say, it's still going to become chametz, even though it's cold water. Doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So you got to be careful when it comes to that. But you're right. The heat makes it worse. That's, like a big no-no.
The heat, accelerates the process.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Okay, so that's the story, right? So, let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So it says Shulchan Aruch, not the doggies. We're finished with the doggies. Okay, so it says, right? Leka bezman hazeh diadam lemichlat hilkach kol mina chalita asur. So it says Shulchan Aruch, right? Exactly what we just mentioned. That nobody knows how to do this properly today, right? To boil it in water today, and to avoid it from becoming chametz. We don't have this technique today. We lost it. You know what I mean? Somewhere. Got lost somewhere along the line. So therefore, it says, right, it's all forbidden, So don't make dumplings, right, for Passover, right, by putting in hot water, right? We don't want any dumplings for Passover, right? That's pretty much what we're saying. By the way, there would be a way to make dumplings for Passover, which would be to use, right, flour, which is made from matzot, right, which is already baked, So then you can do what you want, right? Nothing is going to happen. Once it's baked already, it won't become chametz anymore, So if you want to make dumplings, the way to do it would be, right, to use matzah flour, right? In other words, flour which was made from baked matzot and crushed. That's okay. But if you're using regular flour, you're putting it to hot water, right? Then as we said, right, you're getting into hot water there. So not a good idea. Avoid that. Okay, very good. So I guess we'll stop there. Let's see how much we got here left here. If you guys have some patience, maybe we can finish a chapter. Maybe. Let's see.
Can we?
Let's see. Let's see how much we got left over here. I don't think there's much left. It's a small piece. I'm sorry. You know what? I didn't do the Bet Yosef on this, so uh, it's going to take a little while. So I guess we'll do it next time, Bezat Hashem. I didn't. I went straight to the Shulchan Aruch, and I didn't read the Bet Yosef. So Bezat Hashem, right? Next week will remind me. We have to do the Bet Yosef on Gimel, and then we'll do Dalit afterwards. We'll finish it Bezat Hashem next time, because to do all this will probably take, I don't know, quite a while. So let me just see how much we have here. Yeah, it's gonna be like 15, 20 minutes, whatever. So I guess we'll do it next time. So Bezat Hashem, have a great Shabbat Shalom. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov. Be blessed with wealth, health, and happiness. And make sure you have your matzot ready, for Passover. Right? If you're not gonna bake it at home, make sure you order, right? The good stuff, the soft matzot, like we like to eat, whatever. You can order it. Okay, so Bezat Hashem. There's a guy in Brooklyn, by the way, a Syrian guy, who sells soft matzot. You can order them online, and he delivers them, right? Whatever he sends them out. So okay, well, we'll talk about that, Bezat Hashem. We'll next time. If you like to have soft matzot, because the thing is, with the hard matzot, it hurts the stomach. It's like you have some stones sitting in your stomach, right? It gives you a stomach ache. This is the problem, So especially the first night, when you're getting used to it. So using soft matzot can be a real, right? Can be a real, definitely a big healing, right? Therapy. It's like a matzah therapy. Okay, Bezat Hashem, we'll talk next time. Chazak Baruch.
Thank you so much.
God bless.